Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is, drumroll please, episode 50 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast, brought to you by none other than the legendary Black Belt Magazine. And speaking of legendary, ladies and gentlemen, do I have a guest for you today? This is the one and only innovator of the double sword in the sport karate world. We have the great Kalman Csoka on the show today. And before I allow him to introduce himself, I can't express enough how much of an inspiration Kalman was to me as a young competitor. When I was first traveling the circuit really seriously, starting in about 2007, and then starting to develop as a competitor through 2008, 2009, and then winning my first overall grand in 2010, that was the height of the Kalman Csoka era. That was when he broke out the double sword at the Diamonds in 2007. We're going to be diving into that story. And then so many great wins and great moments that he had over his career leading up to the epic retirement at the 2011 Diamond Nationals. Really one of the greatest runs in the history of sport karate. And it was a huge motivator for my career. And that was something that I looked up to a ton as a young competitor. But that's enough of me talking. Kalman, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself to our audience here.
Well, hey everyone, Kalman here. Jackson, appreciate you having me on, man. I've been listening to these podcasts that you're doing when I can, and I love what you're doing with them. It kind of gives gives a good history and of the sport, and kind of makes even the younger generation that's competing now really get a good sense of the history and tying that into what's going on today. So thanks so much for having me on. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and been looking forward to it. Now you're gonna get me to try to talk about myself for an hour or so. That's gonna be kind of difficult. So we'll give it a shot.
Well, as anybody that's a fan of the show knows, I study this stuff religiously, so I'll certainly be able to fill in the blanks because I've probably watched more Kalman Csoka footage than just about anybody in the world. But we'll put that to the test today. So before we dive into anything competition related, our Black Belt Magazine audience isn't necessarily competition oriented. These are just martial artists of all backgrounds. So take us back. How did the martial arts journey start for you in the first place?
So my dad, when I was young, and this is probably a little bit before I was 4 years old, my dad was traveling a lot. He worked for a company called Rockwell, which was a weapons company at the time. But anyway, so he traveled a lot, was out of town a lot. And so my mom was looking for a martial arts place, really more for her at the time than myself, just to get into a place where she could learn self-defense. With him being gone all the time, she thought that would be a good idea. And of course, me being 3 years old and tagging along, we ended up kind of getting into it together at Joe Corley Karate in Roswell, Georgia, back in 1989. So I was no, I was actually 88. So I was almost 4 when we got into it. A little reluctant at first. Of course, she always tells the story every time we get into the whole, conversation with people. But I know I sat on the side of the mat and was deathly afraid to go on for about 2 weeks. And, I'm sure a lot of 3 and 4 year olds. My daughter just started actually last week. A little beside the point. She just started last week and she jumped right on and everything like that. And I'm like, well, she must get that from her mom, because that's not my introverted personality at all. But anyway, so sat on the side of the mat for like 2 weeks. And I remember one time they played a game in class at the end of class that I wanted to play. And my instructor, I jumped out there and asked, hey, can I play the game? And the instructor at the time said, no, well, you didn't take class. You got to earn it and do a good job in class or whatever, and then we can play a game at the end. So from there on in, I was like, all right, I'm taking class because I want to play the game. So that's what finally got me out into the mat, thank goodness. But so I mean, my mom and I would take obviously not classes together, but we'd go to the same school, and I'd take my youth classes and she'd take her adult classes. And there was a kind of there where she got a little bit ahead of me. I was kind of, I got to around purple belt or whatever, which the style I was in, that was about, right in the middle between white and black belt. And I don't know, I just was kind of, not super serious about it, but, still going. And I remember she was kind of pulling ahead of me as far as the belt ranks go, because she was all in. If anybody knows my mom as you do, she's kind of a gung-ho person. So she was all in, and I remember she getting her black belt before I did, and that kind of irked me just a little bit, not in a bad way, but I was like, all right, well, shoot, she got a black belt. I need to get serious now and get mine. So I don't know, that competitive nature, I guess I didn't realize it was there, but it was. So that kind of lit a fire under me, and got me to earn my black belt there. And then so with that, I mean, the rest is history. Started competing in and around there, and then got my second degree and subsequent degrees after that. And this is kind of all on a studio side, and not really even talking about the tournament side yet, but got the opportunity to be an instructor pretty early on in life. I remember being about 13 or 14 years old, and the karate studio owner at the time at that school was like, Kalman, we'd love for you to be able to do private lessons with some of the students who are, wanting a little bit of extra help in curriculum, getting ready for black belt, or even on the sport karate side of things that want to compete or whatever. And so that was a really great growth experience for me, was being able to teach, younger kids, and it really helped me too, because I mean, I think everybody knows who are teachers or coaches. If you are kind of in that mode, then it really helps you grow yourself and really helps you check yourself as far as what you're doing. So that really got me into that. And then I became an assistant instructor there at the school at about 15. And then 10 years later, we opened up a school of our own, and called Elite Martial Arts. Still, all this is going on in the Atlanta area. And then we ran that for about 11 years. And then, so that's kind of my, outside of sport karate, that's kind of my core martial arts journey in a nutshell there. So.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think is so cool about that is that you and your mom got into it together. I feel like it's not that often that you get, a lot of times you get siblings do it together, things like that. But to have a mother and son do it together is something that's really special. And it also doesn't really surprise me coming from you, because anybody that knows you knows how important family is to you. So it's no surprise that martial arts was a family affair even from the beginning. And now kind of shifting to the competitive side, there are many members of the Csoka, Donahue group that were all excellent martial artists and excellent sport karate competitors. So I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about your family members that competed a little bit, maybe just a little background on each of them, and spotlight them a bit.
Yeah. So, I obviously met my wife, Carolyn, through the martial arts, and, the karate school that I had an opportunity to become a head instructor at. She was obviously there with her son, Austin, and Hunter, and her daughter, Isabel, at the time. So I actually met my wife through martial arts, which is, again, another thing I'm, grateful for, that the martial arts has done for me, obviously, in my life. I'll start with Austin Crane. For those of you who don't know Austin Crane, he's 25 now, but he had a very successful competition career in extreme creative commas, extreme forms. I mean, he even sparred. They all sparred at one point. Even I did. I don't know if people know that, but that was kind of like, all right, if you don't necessarily have to, that doesn't necessarily have to be your main thing, but you're going to learn all three, you're going to be proficient at all three, and then you can decide what avenue you really want to, hit hard and focus on. But anyway, so, Austin was super talented. Just one of those kids that can just pick up something like and be able to, even take it further into the next level, much more talented than me. My gosh. as far as the tricking and everything goes. The rest is history with him. I mean, obviously he has so many accolades that he was able to accomplish. His brother Hunter, and what was great about all these kids I'm going to mention in our family was they each had their own thing that they were really awesome at. Hunter's was the bow. I mean, again, he dabbled in open forms and he was a great fighter too. But his thing was really the bow. And I mean, he just his thing was, I remember when people would watch him compete and, forgive me, I might get a little, emotional because I mean, for those of you who have followed us and our family and close kind of to us and everything, Hunter, passed 2 years ago or whatever. So I'll try to, try not to get too emotional on everyone. But, I remember when people would watch him be like, oh my gosh, his power and his speed. I mean, it looks like he would absolutely, if someone were to walk in the ring or something during a form, goodness gracious, he'd probably, just destroy somebody with his bow or whatever. But so he was awesome at bow. Then you have their sister Isabel, who many don't know, who competed for about a year and a half in there. She did traditional forms, she did nunchucks or whatever. I mean, shoot, she went to a lot of the tournaments with us, bless her heart, and it kind of got to the point where it was like, shoot, I mean, I might as well start competing myself. I mean, I'm going to all these karate tournaments, so she got into it and she was a great sport about it. And then Audrey and Carson, my niece and nephew, I mean, for those of you who know Audrey, obviously awesome, youth girl and women's competitor at the sword, really good at that single sword. And it was funny with her is we kind of had a conversation about double sword and this and that, but, and kind of doing that. And she, really had her own thing going with the single sword that honestly, I don't even think she needed to do it, needed to do double sword. I mean, she just, like I said, she just had her own thing going with that. And then Carson, her brother, his most proficient thing in his latter years of competing, I think, was creative forms. He was always a, solid comma competitor, solid forms competitor, and tricking, and then even fighting too. Like Hunter, him and Hunter probably fought most consistently at tournaments out of all of us, really. But in Carson's latter years in competing, it was really his creative forms, just his dynamics on his hands, his tricking that you were able to do within the realm of creative forms was just right on point. So, I mean, they all had their thing. And, as a coach, kind of coaching each one of these kids, with the help of, their mom, Carolyn, and my mom as well, and we kind of realized this as coaches is like, you don't want to try to, you want to nudge these competitors in certain directions, but they have to develop their own identity and they have to develop their own thing and their own style. And I think that each one of those kids did that super well. And I think are known, at least I believe, for, kind of what they brought to the sport as far as their own identity goes. So.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Just, it's special for me to hear you talk about that, because just like I talked about at the beginning of the show, 2008, 9, 10, me growing up and watching you in the men's division, when I would watch the 14 to 17 runoffs, there would be times when there would be someone from the Csoka family line in every one of those divisions, right? Because Audrey you didn't even mention it, but Audrey's an excellent traditional sword competitor as well, in addition to the CMX stuff. So she would often be in both of those grands. Obviously, Austin and Carson, and me being a bow guy, I love watching Hunter compete. And then, me and all the viewers definitely extend our condolences for that. And I appreciate the impact that he and all of those other family members had on sport karate, because there really was, on a group level, a tangible impact that your entire family has had on the sport. And that has been proven over the course of the past decade. And you talk about, especially with Isabel, you guys were at tournaments all the time. And so she just decided to do it. So what got you that much into it? So now take us back to your personal beginning and what actually got you into competing and what made you fall in love with sport karate in particular.
Yeah. And I will say, we had so many great stories. I mean, we talk about 10, it's going on, in October at Diamonds this year. Fingers crossed that everyone's able to get back in person tournaments. This year, it'll be 10 years since, I last competed. And I mean, to this day, when we all get together for holidays or whatever, I mean, we always go back over the stories and everything and laugh and all that stuff about all the road trips in the vans and, all that stuff. So, I mean, it brought us all that much, closer together and have so many great stories to tell about that. So, man, I wouldn't trade those years for anything. I mean, it was definitely quality. But, so yeah, I mean, I was not quite a black belt yet. I think I was a brown or advanced brown belt in our system. And we had this big tournament in Atlanta in 1991. So I had just turned 6 years old, and it was called the Battle of Atlanta. Obviously, everyone knows the Joe Corley's at the time. And I know, I think what was last year supposed to be like 50 something for the battle? Yeah. So, I mean, many, many years, successful tournament. In fact, at one point it was like, and it's getting to that level again. I can feel it, but it was like the tournament to, be at for sure. Like you always had that. You always had the Diamond Nationals, obviously, that you talk about, and the US Open. Those always seem to be the three, and then Compete Nationals too is in their capital class. Like those were always the tournaments, like, to be at, to go to win at. And all that. But so Battle of Atlanta, my mom decides and I don't even know the full, thing behind it. My mom decides like, hey, let's go compete. Let's try it out or whatever. I'm like, okay, sure. At this point I'm bought in, I'm going to get my black belt, all this stuff. It's like, yeah, I'll go compete. It's my, we went to Joe Corley Karate. So it was our, owners, our chief instructors, tournament. So yeah, let's do it. So I go and I compete in the advanced division, and it's at that time it was like you did weapons, you did forms, you did fight. And that was it. There wasn't all these traditional weapons, CMX weapon or creative weapons, right? Extreme weapons. It was like weapons, forms, fighting, boom. So divisions were obviously massive. I think it's a lot better today, right? Because we can dial in the judging better because of all the segregated divisions and everything. A lot easier. But anyway, so I go and I think I went against one other kid in the advanced division, and I took one of my curriculum forms and I threw in like a tornado kick and like a forward roll and a cartwheel or something like that. And just went out there. And I remember it took I guess as a 6-year-old, it seemed like it took forever for the division to start. I just remember, like, I felt like I was there for like a year waiting on this division to start. When I was like looking at my mom, I was like, Mom, I don't want to do this. Like, it's taking forever. I'm tired and this and that, anything, I guess a normal, not super bought in at the moment as far as competing 6-year-old would say, I guess. But then that division went, did my form, I guess did really well, and ended up getting first place, ended up winning. And I remember, at that point I was like just light bulb went off my head. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. I like that feeling. I mean, shoot. So I remember going up to, at the time at that tournament, they had the stage and all the trophies for the daytime divisions were like on the stage. I can't remember exactly if that was actually the stage they did the nighttime show on or not, but all the trophies or whatever were on stage. So you had your little ticket and you went up, and you gave, all the coordinators of the trophies and everything. You gave them the ticket, and then obviously you get your, first place trophy. And I remember Mr. Corley was up there around that area at the time, and he saw me or whatever. He was like, how'd you do? And I was like, oh, I got first place, and everything. It was super exciting. He was, obviously, praising me and saying how awesome I did or whatever. So for that point, with that whole experience, I was like, all right, I'm hooked or whatever. And, kind of thinking back and trying to remember at 6 years old, I think, the next tournament we did was the US Open that same year. I was a black belt at that tournament. So I was not quite a black belt going in the battle. I was a black belt at that tournament, and completely different ball game. So I remember going to the tournament thinking, oh yeah, man, I'm going to smoke this, and everything, and go there. And I think I got like finalist or whatever, and made it, placed, but that was definitely an eye-opening. It's like, holy cow, there's a whole nother world out here of stuff, like look at all these amazing competitors. And I remember some of the names back then, Cody Gilbo is just, one of the people I remember, because I was like, I want to be that kid. He did the Commas at the time, was on, I don't remember if he was on Metro All-Stars yet or whatever. But so I was hooked as a 7-8-year-old, worked hard to try to be a contender in the black belt division. I remember at 8, I think it was 1 or 2 tournaments into the season, Metro All-Stars came and asked me if I wanted to be, on the team. And that was because I remember as a 7-year-old, like that was the thing for me. It's like, oh, I want to be on that team or whatever. So Metro All-Stars came to me and asked me on the team. And I was just obviously super excited about that. I had a pretty good year in, as an 8-year-old in 1993, that was. I remember one of my closest rivals at the time was Guy Burkett. So we would always go back and forth, in our divisions or whatever. And around that age group too, Jeff Doss was another one at the time too. That was, so we kind of go back and forth with who would win and all that. And then, man, I remember if I'm being too long-winded, I'm sorry, but, kind of really rehashing the last, 25 years or whatever of martial arts. It's kind of coming back to me more than I actually thought it would. But I remember between I did okay in like 1994 as a 9-year-old and everything. But I remember between like that time and then about 1999, I just, couldn't win, couldn't seem to do well or whatever. And I don't, we I was training hard, this and that, but at the same time, what we don't know or what we didn't know is what we didn't know. So, we were training the right ways or whatever. As I look back on it, maybe there's some things of all the things I know now, some things we could have done better, more efficiently, whatever. But I remember there was a spell there of about 5 years where I just could not seem to get any traction and do well. So that's kind of something I like to share with a lot of people who are kind of getting into the whole sport karate thing, is like, if it doesn't happen if success doesn't happen within the first year, 2 years, just if this is really something you're passionate about, just hang on to it, hang on and keep going, because for me, it took a while to really kind of get to a point where, I was a contender again and able to win some tournaments and whatever. So I remember as a 14, 15-year-old being picked up by a team called Team Karate Cares, that was kind of a big, league tournament or whatever, with a lot of great competitors on at the time, like Anthony Atkins and, you had the Pinkston brothers on there and, Matt Emig, obviously, there's a, huge names on that team. So, kind of getting noticed again, and everything after a little bit of a dry spell, and then, getting really the confidence, getting built up or whatever. And, then as a 15-year-old at the Battle of Atlanta, it was funny, it's coincidence, that was Battle of Atlanta again. As a 15-year-old, Battle of Atlanta in 2000, I was able to win my first grand championship. So if you think about, okay, so when I started in 1991 till the year 2000, it took me 9 years to win my first grand championship, and that was in the Forms division. So I guess at that time that would be equal to the CMX Forms division. I was able to go against, at that time, another huge name Austin competitor was Nick Begley. So, he was, whooping up on me all the time. I was able to get my first one finally at that tournament. And that was a really, defining moment for me mentally. Was, okay, it's like, I can do this, it's like, okay, now how can we recreate that feeling, and kind of just willing it to happen, again and again and again. It didn't happen, often after that. I won a few here and there or whatever. Well, shoot, man. And around that time, tricking started coming up, and then, more things were going. But, so I think as far as, kind of getting into the competition and the real kind of to the point to where it was like a moment, probably that battle that year. But yeah, so
Right.
there's more, but
right. And so
what's
much
that
back there already. So first of all, I had no idea that you were ever on Metro. That's crazy. And for our viewers that maybe weren't around the karate scene back in that time period, Metro All-Stars was widely considered to be one of the best teams, if not the best team in the sport, before you had your Transworld Oil and then later on your Paul Mitchell and teams like that. Because Metro at one point literally sponsored the #1 and #2 competitor in almost every division in sport karate. So there's quite a history behind Metro, and I never even knew that Kalman represented Metro, so that's crazy. And then moving on, what's really interesting is, you mentioned that drought that you had, and then that win that kind of got you back on the horse at the Battle of Atlanta. It was in forms, right? So we all know that you became the Kalman Csoka as an adult with the double sword, but when did sword first become your thing? When did you start doing sword, and then when did it start really doing well for you competitively?
Well, it's funny because, I mean, I had so many, I shouldn't say so many, I had several different phases in my career of the things I was, hot at or, being successful in or enjoyed or whatever. And, that was kind of, I think of chapters of the career, and that kind of whole from 2000 on backwards was kind of whole of like a first chapter or whatever, really. And then, I had, and I don't want to bore anybody with part 2, but it's really, part 2 is where I kind of once I figured out the mental side, and I can get into all that if you want, but later on or whatever. But once I figured out the mental side, then that was even, that really, really helped me. But anyway, so, I mean, kind of within that first chapter, I had my first weapon I started with, and this was when I was 7, was the sai, actually. And, there's some people who can do some crazy stuff with the sai from a creative standpoint, but I was not one of them. It's not a good weapon for me. And then so did kamas for a while. And then while I was still competing with kamas, we were kind of in between karate schools, and we went to a Shotokan school. And that's where I kind of got my groundwork from a sword standpoint, and then dabbled in the sword and everything. But kamas was kind of really my main weapon until about 1999, and then we thought, for me, and I think it was a good move on really my mom's part, was we thought for me, more dynamic for my look and kind of the way I moved and everything would be sword. And then at the time, like I mentioned, Nick Begley, I mean, he was just crushing the sword and whatever. And I remember trying to get to that level that he was at, to try to contend with him or whatever. And, it kind of eventually would happen. But, that's kind of where the sword root started from, I guess. So.
Right. So that's really interesting. It's almost like the way that you talk about it, it's almost like sword was a strategic decision, as in like, well, this is the way that I move. This is my body type. I look good doing the sword. And so it just kind of worked out that way. So, and we are going to get into some of your strategy a little bit, because that's one of my favorite things about this sport that I feel like is widely underused in competition today. I feel like people just go out there and do a form and don't think enough about strategy. But we'll save that for here coming up in just a little bit. So what would you say, so the win at the Battle of Atlanta in forms, and I believe that was 2001, you said, is what kind of got you back on the horse. And kind of by my tier list, right, I think that there's good competitors, there's great competitors, and then there's your generational competitors, right? So a competitor that can win an overall every now and then, a competitor that's on a team, kind of sounds like what you were around that time when you kind of, like I said, got back on the horse with that win. Would you say that there was like a defining moment where you took that next jump and went from the good to the great competitor? And just for perspective, for great competitor, by my definition, is can string together 2 or 3 overall wins in a row, maybe wins the most overalls out of a season here or there, that type of competitor. Was there a defining moment prior to Double Sword that kind of told you that you were at that level?
Yeah, me hurting myself, really. So, from me hurting my knee and having knee surgery, from 2000 and around that time in 2000, Jackson, as you know, tricking started coming on the scene, so when we would trick to put those moves in our forms. So tricking wasn't really a separate identity as what it is now, and it's, completely evolved into its own gatherings and its own brands and all that stuff. You know what I mean? So, but back then it's like we got a trick so we could put in our form. And that's when we showed off our trick, was in our form. So that was really a lot of our teenage, I think, mindsets was that. And then it started becoming a little bit bigger. So from about 2000 to 2005, like that was kind of like where my head was at, was like, I'm doing musical forms, I'm getting all these tricks down, and I'm putting it in my form. And, and I was successful at that. And I think, to your point, I was becoming, from, good to better, and then kind of get into that maybe that gradish, thing, winning a grand here and there or whatever. But, and I think as, the landscape of the tournaments changed, like, mats being put down for rings, right? Because I remember being, a lot of those years as a kid competing on concrete, you know what I mean? So everyone was kind of like, you did a backflip on concrete, you were freaking awesome, so, so when the landscape changed, I think people were more, willing to put, more and more tricks in their forms. And, so that was kind of from 2000 to 2005-ish, that was really kind of where my head was at, was, getting better and better at tricking, putting those tricks in my form. And then kind of around, 2001 and actually in 2000, Charlie Lee at Charlie Nationals was the first, at least that I know of, to do a trick battle in a karate tournament, right? Maybe they were doing it overseas or whatever, I'm not exactly sure, but I think for NASCA, Charlie Nationals in 2000 was the first one to do a trick battle. It featured Daniel Sterling, Manny Brown, Anthony DeMarco. I remember went out there and did about 1 million flares or whatever really fast, or not flares, but windmills or whatever. So that was awesome. And that really even got me hooked more, into the tricking thing. It's like, I want to be in a trick battle, heck yeah. So, so I was actually an alternate in the 2001 Charlie Lee Nationals, to Daniel Sterling. Daniel, I think, had a bout or whatever. So I kind of took his spot or whatever, and was able to do well. And, I think so with those trick battles, that evolved into trick gatherings. So kind of from there on, there would be other trick battles going on at more and more tournaments and across the seas at tournaments like the French Open or whatever, which, we were invited to for a couple of years. And then Charlie, it kind of being I credit really him and his tournament a lot to, it's just my viewpoint or whatever, maybe other people's have theirs, but really crediting some of that to the evolution of trick gatherings or whatever. Cause, got to the point where Charlie Lee Nationals, there would be, people that would come in and wouldn't even necessarily compete in the divisions. They would be they'd be tricking the whole time. And the energy that they brought would actually make the divisions so awesome, because they would come and watch all the divisions, right? Because they were friends with all of us and everything. And so, that made those tournaments for those years there in the mid 2000s. Some of the craziest, most energetic tournaments, that I can remember. And, those were trick gatherings going on, and rings that Charlie Lee actually set aside just for the trickers. So they would be tricking the whole weekend as the regular divisions would be going on. So those were some, like I said, some crazy tournaments. But, in that time, I think probably one of my, beside being able to do double sword and all that stuff, being able to do, synchronized forms with Marcel Jones, is probably the most fun I've had, competing. And, really, because like I said, I would, like you kind of mentioned it earlier, there's so much more that goes into training than just, trying to win or whatever, right? There's a whole psychological thing that goes into it. But actually, the way my mind works, if someone like Marcel comes and asks me, hey, do you want to do synchronized forms with me? I'm going to really put that on myself to take that as serious, like with everybody, as serious as I possibly can, because now it's not just me that, someone else is relying on me, right? To train properly and do well and show up at a tournament and really perform. And so that was some of the, most fun I've had or whatever. And we had a good run there for a little bit. And then I got hurt tricking in 2005. And that was really a defining moment for me so I was 20 at the time then. And that was really that was kind of like chapter 2, I guess I would say, from 2005. And that was really an eye-opening moment. It's like, well, I can't trick, can't do anything. I'm not going to sit around. I remember Stephen Rennie, who's a good friend of mine, and he's actually in Thailand right now directing his own action movies and all this crazy stuff. But I remember he would drag me to the gym and still make me watch the tricking sessions when I was hurt, so I wouldn't get too depressed or too detached from it or whatever. But I remember taking my sword with at the time. And then that's all I would do is just practice releases and practice twirls and this and that, and try to come up with new things. Like, well, if I can't trick, I'm going to do something. I'm not just going to sit here or whatever. So that really made me learn to completely 100% hone in on something, because that's all I could do. And I remember, so I try to use a lot of things in my life to give me that extra little bit of motivational edge to prove maybe to others, mostly to myself, that, I'm not done. I can keep going. I can be better. And then so I kind of reinvented myself a little bit, and sword became the thing. I could still trick here and there, but my knee, honestly, I don't know if it was rehab or whatever. My knee really never has been the same since. But I would still trick here and there, but, really learning is like, okay, so I use that. It's like, all right, they told me it would take 9 months for me to come back and compete. I'm going to do it in 6. And I remember at the Compete Nationals in 2006, I was 5 months out of surgery and I started competing again. And so that was kind of more for me, to use that whole point of my life as kind of fuel for the next, years to come or whatever. And so that's kind of really how sword took off for me. So.
And that transitions us to what's going to be my favorite part of this, which is the chapter 3 that we're going to transition to. A couple of points that I want to bring up before we move on to that, though. You mentioned some of the most fun that you had was competing alongside Marcel in the synchronized form division. For those of you that are watching the podcast that don't know who Marcel Jones is, go ahead, pause this real quick, head on over to YouTube and look up Marcel Jones, because he's, in my opinion, the greatest creative forms competitor by the modern definition of creative forms. The greatest creative forms competitor of all time, in my opinion, is Marcel Jones. And Kalman saying that he had fun with it is one thing, but they were, in my opinion, one of the top 10 best synchronized forms ever. Certainly one of my top 10 favorites to watch on YouTube, and you can go find the tape of them doing that. So that was a really special sync form. But anyway, so now we talk about this transition. And it's funny, we talk about the evolution of tricking, and the evolution of tricking was in a lot of ways my earliest rival in sport karate, because I was never someone that tricked. I could never jump. And so I just was never interested in it, never tried it, never did it. And so from an early age, I said, well, Bo's going to have to be the way that I try to win. Like, I'm going to have to out weapons trick everybody else, because I'm just not going to do this other stuff. That's just not going to be who I am. But as I was trying to reinvent myself like that, or I guess invent myself, I wasn't reinventing anything, I was inventing at that point. That's when tricking was at its height. And that's when, if you ever, for those of you watching, if you ever go back and you watch old sport karate videos and you see people in the background doing this thing, that was born from tricking getting so big. And that's like the celebratory thing people do at trick battles, to say like, oh, that was sick, or that was dope, or whatever. And so a lot of those things we still see in the sport today, you know what I mean? For those OGs that were around in that like 2005 to 2010 era. So kind of a cool time capsule there if you ever find any of those videos and just kind of see what people are doing around the rings. Sometimes you can even catch some of those little trick sessions going on in the background of a video or something like that. But anyway, like I said, transitioning to now this chapter 3, you come off the injury earlier than the doctor said that you would. And by Diamonds of 2007, you've devised something that there's no way you could have expected how successful it would become, right, in double sword. So take us through when was that first idea to be like, I'm going to try double sword, and then lead us up into doing that for the first time at Diamonds 2007. If that even was the first time, was there one before that we don't know about? Just kind of tell us the origin story of double sword.
No, just a lot of training to try to get it right. But no, like back to really your point on Marcel. He was, being able to do sync forms with him. He was such a detailed. If you ever watch a creative form of Marcel, you can see all the detail in it. And I agree 100%. He was probably. I would even take it a little bit further, not just creative forms, but open hand forms. Just the cleanest, the sharpest. I mean, every finger was right where it needed to be. And again, it was one of those, like, if someone walked in the ring and got hit by something he was doing, they wouldn't make it. So being able to train with him for our sync form taught me how to try to dial it, really dial it in and clean, some of the things that I wasn't really proficient at, clean some of that stuff up or whatever, and then take that, right, get hurt, take that, and then use that into the sword stuff. So, I really am thankful, grateful for, being able to have that time with Marcel doing that stuff. But, and he's, one of my best friends too. We still talk to this day and hang out when we can. But so anyway, yeah, so, I had some success coming back in the single sword. And at that time, Mark Canizzato in the adult division was killing it. And I just could not, I'd win in divisions. I would, be able to beat him in divisions here and there. I just could not win in the grands. Like I would, next tournament, new trick. Nope, wouldn't do it. Next tournament, new trick. Nope, wouldn't do it. There were some things non-element wise that I could have done better as far as some basics and things that I look back on as a more seasoned coach now that I can, really pick apart. But I mean, I think everyone's like that about themselves or whatever, but just couldn't beat them. And then I remember in the beginning of 2007, I kind of, double sword came from, just sidetrack a little bit. Double sword really, originally got the idea was, people were doing double sword long before I did a double sword, just obviously with a traditional aspect to it, right? With like the short wakizashi and the longer normal length sword that everybody knows as a katana. And obviously, Shaheen Jahanbakhsh, has made that, a mainstay, iconic thing in the sport. He's kind of most known for that. I would say, among other things, but, so that was, and kind of seeing that done and a traditional element, I was wondering is like, could I make that a CMX thing, and, it wouldn't, although it can now. There are some ideas now where you can take a long sword and a short wakizashi and do a CMX form, and it can look pretty crazy because there's a little bit more freedom that you have with a shorter sword compared to two long ones. But anyway, at the time when I was trying to think of this, is like, okay, if I can take that, make it a creative thing, and do it with two katanas, I think I might have some. It just, obviously sword is really the way I was taught, and it's not, the law, but the way I was taught is a right hand dominant weapon, right? So even if you're left-handed, you learn right hand on top on the sword. So that's fun when you're teaching seminars. But anyway, so so being able to get the left hand somewhere up to speed as the right hand to make double sword even look half good, that took probably the most time. So I really had to kind of develop a form that, wasn't, and I had to do it right. It had to flow well. And, my biggest fear was it looking kind of clunky. And honestly, I feel it did. I think I had in 2007 Diamonds, I just think I had the aura of the Diamonds because at that point it was in the auditorium, and the big, the big staging area and all that. And with the seating that's up real high. So, I mean, it was a big, vibrant atmosphere and all that for that night show there at that time. And I think just the aura of coming out with two swords or whatever, and just kind of with the music helping me out a little bit and stuff like that, but honestly, I mean, if, not to shoot down my own self doing that, but it was a little clunky. But I think it was, I think it proved that it was successful at that term and I was able to win, but it can be even better. So that was, again, another instance where I used that to be like, okay, I can do it. It's not a complete disaster. Now let's perfect it. Let's make double sword look as natural and as easy looking. I'm not saying commas are easy or bow and even double bow nowadays is easy looking or easy, but making double sword look as natural as commas, making double sword look as natural as bow, as natural as single sword, as natural as and as smooth as, a Matt Emig nunchuck form. You know what I mean? So that was kind of really, and the training up to that, like I said, it took a while. Like I was working on it for, I'd say close to 9 months before I even, with the goal, like, okay, I'm going to do this. I kind of wanted to do it at the US Open that year, but it wasn't ready. I don't think, I don't think it would have been ready it wasn't ready actually for 2007 US Open. So I pushed it back, waited till Diamonds, and I'm like, okay, I'm either gonna do it at US Open or I'm gonna do it at the Diamonds. And so it ended up, I think, working out, okay. And then following that, like I said, the next year, I feel at Compete Nationals the next year in 2008, I did a much better form technically, I think, than in the Diamonds the previous year. And then, like I said, I had a whole nother off season to kind of work on it and get things smoothed out, and then just kind of, started taking off from there. So, I knew I needed to do something because, like I said, Mark Canizzato or whatever at the time. I mean, there were other competitors, obviously, too. That were Ross Levine. Obviously Matt. Matt Emig. And shoot, they're. I mean, if I'm leaving out names, it's not because I'm disrespecting anybody, but there was a lot of good competitors or whatever, and just trying to find something to. It's like, okay, at that point, it was like, I understand what focusing on something is now, but how can I find something to get to that next level to where people are going to remember what I've done, right? Because at that point, it was kind of more of, yes, winning the grands and everything is nice, and winning all these tournaments is nice or whatever. But I want people to remember, and possibly, hopefully, and I think the digital age nowadays helps it a little bit. But people just to kind of remember, the forms that some of us did or whatever. There are some iconic forms that I think we did that people hopefully remember. Because I remember being a young kid and all I wanted to be was, Carmichael Simon and Mike Chat and John Valera and those guys or whatever. Like those were my three guys that, man, I wanted, like, just give me a little piece of each of those guys, trying to be like them. And I'm happy. But I remember watching and feeling the way I felt when John Valera would do a form, or when Mike Chat would do his, open hand form to Street Fighter, and, Carmichael Simon would come out with that crazy long combo that he did. But just feeling the way I felt, I was like, man, I'd like to get to the point to where people felt like that when they watched me. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up, I always refer to that trio in history as the great triumvirate, right? John Valera, Mike Chat, and Carmichael Simon. And then what's even more interesting is I refer to a second great triumvirate as the big weapons divisions that would go down between yourself, Matt and then Rudy Raynon after Rudy had kind of Mark had gone off and gone more Hollywood, and Rudy had kind of taken that spot in the division. I saw that as like the closest thing we'd gotten to that second coming of that type of a trio that was really contending with each other at the same time. And you mentioned how you didn't think the double sword looked very polished in 2007, was much better at competes of 2008. So my next question is, one of the things that was so impressive to me studying your career is if you look at the Diamonds 2007 form, and then you look at, to me, what stands out is the U.S. Open form in 2008, because that was the form where I think it might have been the first time you threw the double, what we call box cutters, the double horizontal sword releases, made that catch. And, and me watching that form both in the moment and then now as somewhat of a self-described sport karate historian, that 2008 U.S. Open was the point where I realized nobody's going to beat this for a while. Like, this is going to go on a run, and I don't see anybody that can stop it right now. So in your opinion, did you feel like that U.S. Open was kind of a telling moment? When was it that you realized that double sword was going to be as successful as it would become over the next several seasons? Was there a tournament where you realized I've done something, or when was that?
Yeah, because after 2007 Diamonds, I didn't want it to feel like, and I'm not speaking for anybody, but I didn't want it to feel like the judges to be like, okay, he did something pretty cool, we'll give it to him, or whatever. The whole, everything felt right. The atmosphere was good, coming out, pulling out two swords or whatever. And just, I didn't want it to be all, smoke and mirrors. That's what maybe I was afraid of. So I thought it might, from a judging standpoint, from a spectator standpoint, lose some hype. So I think, I really do. I think once I was able to start incorporating fluently into the form some double releases or whatever, and then finally, so the 2008 U.S. Open that you mentioned was the first, ISKA, world title I was able to win. And again, previous years, Mark had beaten me or whatever, and other competitors, Lauren Kearney, I couldn't, I couldn't get, past her in grands and stuff like that. So, and the divisions or whatever. So, it's like there's so many good people who were, on the stage for those tournaments or whatever. It's like, I got to do, and again, it's like, I got to do something that's going to, that's going to stand out, because I was kind of fearing at that time, halfway through a season, that, double sword as it was, I was always afraid it might not be enough. I was always afraid it's like people are going to expect, maybe the judges are going to expect more. And I think I mentioned that to you guys on one of our Paul Mitchell trainings or whatever. I don't know, but, I remember getting together and just kind of, we would all sit and chat or whatever, and about what we can do in our forms, our mindsets or whatever. And I think I shared that with y'all. And I remember Casey Marks was there. And I was like, my biggest fear was, losing what I was gaining at the time, if I'm being 100% honest, and people wanting more and me not meeting that expectation. So it's like, I have to do a double release. I have to make it look good or whatever. So, I think at that point doing that, and then, being able to win that tournament was another little, I think, solidifier and kind of what I was doing there at the time. So, so yeah.
Absolutely. And we've teased talking about strategy kind of throughout the show. And now I'm going to go ahead and dive into it, which we got to be careful here, because I could talk about strategy for 3 hours, but I'll try to avoid that today. But to me, one of the things that helped double sword never burn out, as one might say, right? Because you kind of talk about like always being worried, like, is the hype going to come to an end, right? And to me, what we've seen before when there's certain, and I'm not going to call out any specifics, but a gimmick, as I like to call it, is something that somebody can use to win once or twice. But if you do it too much, it loses its luster, right? And to me, what prevented double sword from ever becoming a gimmick and double sword becoming a real thing was the fact that you didn't overuse it. Almost always in divisions, and very often in your daytime grands, you were doing a single sword form and saving the double sword form almost exclusively for the nighttime finals. I've got to believe that was intentional, right? So tell us a little bit of the strategy behind when you would do single sword versus when you actually brought out double sword for everybody to see.
Well, I mean, shoot, double sword was hard work, man. I had to do that 4 or 5 times in a weekend, Jeez. But no, I still wanted to prove myself in single sword too. I still wanted to prove that I can win, with single sword. And I did double sword in the night show and in the grands, just because for me, it really got me in and for those grand divisions and those night shows, you have to be in the moment, right? And so my mentality and everything was really kind of crush, kill, destroy when I went out and did a form. But my mentality in single sword was in the divisions, because the mood is different in divisions and a night show, right? So some of the introductory theatrics or whatever I would do in the double sword was because I was completely bought in to that moment, right? I always tell people if you're not convinced in what you're doing, no one else is going to be convinced that's watching you. So I was completely bought in, and I don't think doing double sword every single time or whatever, I would have been that bought in. That was almost like my little reward for myself. Well, it's like, well, if you want to do double sword, you've been training on it all this time. If you want to do it, you better win so you can get up on stage and do it. So, that was my kind of mentality in division, was just crush, kill, destroy, do as good as I could on the single sword or whatever. And, then be able to reward myself with, doing the double sword, because I had a new move or a new tweak or whatever that I wanted to show people, when I'm not gonna be able to show anybody it if I can't get there and, get to the final. So, I think back on it, it's like, I think now thinking back on then, it's like, I would have liked to even try to put myself kind of in that mode, even in a single sword performance in a grand, and seeing if I could have could have maybe won here and there with it. But again, and we've all talked about this, it's, if you start something, it's hard to, it might seem like you're taking a step back if I would have started doing single sword in the grands or whatever, but that wouldn't have been the case, but it might seem like it, you know what I mean? So I kind of was bought into, I'm going to do single sword in divisions, and I'm going to do double sword in the finals and such. And so that pattern stuck with me. So.
And I think that's really interesting, because it's almost like the strategy side of it was almost a self-motivator, right? Like you save the double sword for the grands, not necessarily because it gave you a better chance to win, but because you held yourself more accountable for winning with the single sword. And then it just kind of became, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I have felt this with some of the signature bow tricks that I've come out with, similar to how you talk about doing double sword. Once you get on stage, all of a sudden you kind of are locked into doing it, because if you don't do it, then it's going to look like you took a step back from what you did the last tournament, right? And I think for anybody that wants to compete at the highest level, and Kalman, I think that you'll agree with this, there comes a point, if you're on a win streak, that you're not trying to beat whoever's in the division with you. You're trying to beat the last form that you did at the previous tournament, because the judges start to look for a reason for the streak to end. They start to look for a reason to give it to that other competitor that's been placing second every time, right? And that's one of the hardest parts about holding a streak together, is you have to always try to best yourself with each form that you do. And Kalman, you talk about the responsibility that you felt to always step up to that and have the new double release ready. And that brings me to a much simpler question. What do you think is the hardest sword trick that you ever landed in competition? Or if there's 2 or 3 that are close, well, what are those?
Oh man, I'd say competition wise, yeah, probably. And I can't even remember. I don't even think I did. Double box cutter with a spin, spin around catching is probably the hardest. But I mean, I think, linking, there was a couple tournaments where I'd link a double box cutter to another, double release or whatever. So that was probably the hardest, and would probably, make me kind of crap my pants as I was getting to that moment. But, I shouldn't say that, because, as competitors, I mean, we're so, at that moment prepared, right? It's we, and And I think that's one of the things, Jackson, I respect so much about what you do. It's like, you train and prepare so hard and you you're going to get out there. Now it always doesn't pan out. It never always panned out for me, but you're going to get out there and you're going to do it and you're going to make it happen. And the new trick is going to happen or whatever. And, you're just going to will it to happen. Right. And I think that's some of the great competitors throughout the eras or whatever, they got up on stage and it was their moment and you guys did it and you made it look good while you do it, because you can do a trick or whatever or release and it not look good. It'd be a awesome, super hard trick, but everything that goes around it, how you go into it, how you come out of it, right? The attitude you have while you're doing it makes it good. Right. So I think hardest trick, that, but I think it's even harder to take a trick and make it look like it wasn't just put in the form to be put in the form, but make it look like that piece of the form needs the trick in it or else it wouldn't look right. So you're actually now giving the trick and the flash, as we called it back in the day, more of a purpose. Right. So that was always the challenge. It's like, how can you make something look seamless and make it look like it's supposed to be in the form there, and or else it wouldn't look right otherwise. So I don't know. That was kind of my mindset behind it. And that's what I try to tell kids when I'm training them or whatever. So.
And speaking of mindset, so you mentioned something really interesting there when you talked about, oh, well, this is one of the harder ones and, crap myself as I'm throwing it. And then you backpedal a little bit and then you're like, well, we prepare so much as competitors so that you don't have that reaction. And first off, thank you for the compliment, because that means a lot coming from you that you noticed that about my tricks as well. And what's so funny about that is that is something that when I was 11 years old, I recognized that in your forms and tried to replicate that, because, and this is the question that I'm dying to ask, because what I would notice when you would go on stage is you were never nervous. I would see other competitors like have a nervous shake or like have to do deep breath. I would see other competitors get nervous before they compete. And I never saw Kalman nervous. And so when I was 11 or 12 years old, I was like, okay, well, that's what I have to do. I just won't be nervous. I'll just never be nervous again. And that'll be it. And people don't believe me when I say this, but literally from the time that I was like 13 all the way up until now, I just didn't allow myself to be nervous. Like, people ask me, Jackson, how do you not get nervous? I'm like, I don't let it enter my mind. I go on stage, I do the form, and that's it. There's nothing to be nervous about. Just go and execute, right? So what was your mindset there? Did you actually get nervous and you hit it really well? Or was it kind of like this weird psychological thing that I found where it just doesn't exist?
It teeters on the line of being nervous and then being anxious to just do something that you've been working super hard at over and over and over again in training. Again, kind of going back to when I hurt myself, I told myself at that time when I said, okay, sword's going to be my thing. I don't think I can get back to the point tricking wise that I was before I hurt my knee. So sword's got to be it. I told myself, it's like, okay, all these great athletes in these other sports that are world-renowned athletes or whatever, is like they have a formula and they follow that formula pretty religiously so that when it comes to be game time, they're prepared. And I really tried it got to the point in probably the last 5 years of my competing where I enjoyed training almost more than I enjoyed competing. Well, for one, I was getting a little bit older, and so it was really just a form of exercise, because, with the karate school and everything and the kids and all that stuff, it was really just, like, this is my hour. And that's really all I had is an hour, was to just go into my own little world and train. One, for exercise, 2, it was a great stress reliever, obviously, but 3, it's like, preparing and dialing in for the next competition. So by the time you get to the competition or whatever, like, you're not thinking about messing up, because in your mind, it happens, because we're not God, we're human, we're imperfect. So you're going to have times where you're going to mess up. I mean, that's just the way it is, but you're not thinking about that stuff, because in your mind, you're prepared, because the training took more of a precedent over the competing. And I think once I figured that out, then I was able to get more consistent with that. Not just like you said, win a grand or a tournament here and there, but really, be able to string together some success. So
I just love hearing that, because that's something that always fascinated me, was like, I know what I've put in my mind to try to replicate the way that Kalman looked when he would go up there. But what was actually in Kalman's mind is always something that I've wondered. So that's an interesting perspective. And I couldn't agree more, right? The more prepared you are, the less worried you have to be, because you're prepared, right? And so half of competition psychology is having yourself ready, knowing that you believe in yourself. The other half of it, and something that I've always tried to make sure that I take into account when I prepare my forms, because people see me do one bow form on stage at a tournament, but I typically have 3 or 4 different variations that are ready based upon how my competitors perform, right? If competitor A drops, competitor B doesn't, it's form A. If competitor B drops, competitor A doesn't, it's form B, right? So on and so forth. So when we talk about looking at your other competitors, I'll be more general with this one for you. You've mentioned so many great names so far. Who would you say is the one competitor that pushed you the most during your run of double sword, and why do you think that is?
Well, I think. Well, short answer, I think it's honestly Matt Emig, and the reason I say that is because one, he's obviously awesome. I think he's I think as far as tenure and time and accomplishments, I think he's probably up there as far as top 3 as the greatest sport martial arts competitor ever. Just because of all the things he's done, all the things he's given back, from all his teaching and all that stuff and everything. But I think as far as the time when I had come on and started really doing double sword, and he was hurt at the time. He had a really bad, leg injury in 2008 or whatever. So I knew he would come back. And so me being able to start to get some success with the double sword and really get that. And I was, always training as like, well, Matt's going to come back. Matt's going to come back. But during that time, there was, Rudy, there was, Mark, there was Ross Levine, there was Lauren Kearney, there, so it just Caitlin Deschelle before they kind of, I didn't go against Lauren and Caitlin as much as I went against the other guys, because they started splitting men and women a lot. So, so I think as far as just consistent, just relentless competition, I think it was Matt, because it got to the point to where, Rudy had moved on, to do all that he's doing now. And Mark had moved on, and, Matt and I were, that was, so it was just, kind of felt relentless sometimes. It's like, well, here we go again, every 2 weeks or every month or whatever. So, that would always kind of, I think, probably push me the most from a competitor, rivalry, standpoint, so.
Right. Now, we're going to go off script here a little bit, because, so for those of you that don't know, one thing that Paul Mitchell does is, as a team building practice, really, is very often the forms competitors will room with fighting competitors instead of the fighters rooming with fighters and the forms competitors rooming with forms. They like to mix us up a lot, right? And I wish I could remember who the fighter was. I think it was Mike Palmero, but don't quote me on that. I know that Mike watches the show sometimes. So Mikey P, if you see this and it was you, tell me. But I remember it was one of the fighters, and I know I didn't dream this. They said they were rooming with you at a tournament, and it was Friday night, and Matt had beat you in musical weapons. And whoever this fighter was came back into the room to go to bed, and you were in there doing push-ups. And they were like, Kalman, what are you doing? And then you were like, Matt beat me tonight. It can't happen tomorrow, right? So first off, do you remember that? Can you confirm that? Do you remember that moment?
I probably, she had a lot of crazy things. But, push-ups, I don't know why I'd be doing push-ups. I'd be sore the next day. Like, I don't know. I think I was probably doing something. But, someone would – Matt would beat me, someone would beat me, I would beat someone, right? I know the other person, right, on the receiving end of that would always be, mad as all get out before the next day, and come back on Saturday, with, fire under their backside to, get redemption and win, the tournament, right? Because it obviously wasn't over Friday night. But, It's probably true. I don't know, but I remember one of those guys in one of the Paul Mitchell things kicked me in the face so fast with a kick or whatever when we were doing sparring, because we did form stuff and we got together for our Paul Mitchell workouts and everything, and then we sparred or whatever, and I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't sparred in a couple of years. I got to go against these guys like Alex Lane and Mike Pombiero and these guys, and good gosh, I mean, like I said, I got hit in the face so many times that weekend. I think it was the weekend of Ocean State. I don't know, dude, that was one of those where we got together or whatever, but Lord, that wasn't very fun at the moment, just getting beat up by those guys. But anyway, so sidetracked there for a little bit. But yeah, I probably did something stupid like that where I was preparing the next day. But, you know, kind of to go back or whatever, you know, you mentioned when I feel like I made it was, in fact, being asked at the end of 2008 to be on Paul Mitchell, you know, because, you know, as a kid, it was, you know, Metro All-Stars and this and that. And then, you know, getting a little bit older as a kid and then seeing John Valera, Mike Chat, Carmichael Simon, you know, all those guys, Casey Marks, I mean, shoot, all the success that they had, and it's great that they were, all you wanted to do is be one of them, and they were all on Paul Mitchell, right? So, I mean, it was so surreal when I was kind of like, is this a joke, you know, when I think we all kind of think that, but when they asked at the end of 2008, before 2009 season to be on a team, like, you know, okay, it's like, okay, I had the U.S. Open win, and then I was able to win diamonds, and then asked by Paul Mitchell. It's like, you know, finally, you know, I think I've kind of made it to maybe a different tier. But I use that even more. It's like, so I always had this fear, and it's funny, my wife always gets on to me about it. It's like, why can't you ever just enjoy something? You know, as far as a victory goes, or as far as an accomplishment goes or whatever. And I was like, well, because tomorrow is a different day, right? So, and I always had this fear of just, and still have it, of just losing everything. I don't know why. It's like, I've got to keep, it's like the more you gain success-wise or with your family or whatever, the more you feel like you're going to lose it. So, like, you know, just keep driving, you know, forward. And so I even use that more, being asked on the team. It's like, well, shoot, now I gotta work even harder, get even better, because now I'm on the team. I don't want to be asked to leave the team, you know? So I don't know. So like I said, my Carolyn always knocks me for that. It's like, why can't you just enjoy something? I don't know if it's just a sheer, just competitive, you know, nature or whatever. But I wanted to mention that because, like, I think at that point, being asked by them and not really being sure how many years I had left or wanted to do it because of other things that were coming up in life or whatever, definitely gave me a few more years. And I'm glad it did, because I think, you know, I was really able to, I think, put the foot on the gas pedal at that point. So.
It's you talk about the responsibility that you feel when getting on Paul Mitchell. You know, that I couldn't agree with that more, and I think that every person that's ever represented the team would agree with you. You know, a lot of people don't know this, but when I got on the team in 2012, literally like 6 months after you retired, when I got put on the team, they put me on the team an hour and a half before I had to compete on Friday at U.S. Open. And so, like, they literally put me in Lauren's uniform and were like, go compete for us. And I had to reconcile my entire life's work to get on the team, and now having to represent them in like an hour and a half and get warmed up and be ready to perform at a U.S. Open, right?
That's a mind warp for you. There you go.
I know, right? I almost didn't have time to think about it, you know what I mean? Which is crazy. And what's interesting is you talk about not knowing how much time you had left, and then, you know, obviously glad you did get that extra boost, because those next few years was probably one of, if not the most iconic run in sport karate history. And to me, that is completely encapsulated in two moments. And I want to take a little bit of time right here at the end of the show to reflect on each of them. The first was my personal favorite form that you ever ran, 2010 Diamond Nationals. Shortly after your father had passed away. We'll start with that one. But then I do also want to transition and talk about what is probably the most iconic single performance in sport karate history, which is the 2011 retirement form with the blindfold. But let's start in 2010. Take us through the build up and those emotions and what goes through your mind running that form.
Oh man, so Dad passed on, that was 2010. So Dad passed on, was it September 21st that year? So, um, it was about a month or so after. And, I mean, again, it was just using another moment of my life to make a cause, to do something memorable. That Dad was he did self-defense and some street thing in the military and all that, but never really took the martial arts that we did with us, but was our biggest supporter of my mom, trucking me all over the country for all those years. Biggest supporter of all the kids, Audrey and Carson, and then, his other soon-to-be grandkids, Hunter, Austin, and Isabel, and all that we did, and would go to the tournaments when he could. And, he had, for those that knew him, he was always there, at the rings, watching people and everything. And, again, things that we talk about to this day were some of our, fondest memories on some of those moments. But, I felt like, it was just, this forms obviously, and I think anyone would do that same thing. Like, this forms for him, thank you for all the finances and all the time and, all the sacrifices that him and Mom made to, get us to all these tournaments and everything. And, he went to the US Open in 2010. That was the last tournament he went to. That was obviously a great tournament, a lot of fun and everything. And I think about that weekend often. But, and again, it was just one of those moments to where, if you're a competitor, you understand, or maybe I'm just weird. I don't know. But you just go into one of those moments to where you kind of black out, right? And you just go and you're nothing matters at that moment. You're prepared, but you're doing it for a little bit, greater reason than just winning a trophy. And so that was it. And, emotions happen, and I do things in the form that, a lot of the things I did were never pre-scripted, they just come out. And so I think that was just sheer, emotion, loving what you do and doing a form for someone, that loved to watch you do what you did, so. Yeah.
That's really special and beautifully put. What's crazy is that I know exactly what you're talking about with obviously I don't know what it's like to lose a father and have to compete after that. But when you talk about the blackout that almost happens, right? And, and I think, again, not comparing this to losing a father, but, when Kevin Thompson, nobody knew that it would be his last Ocean States. But literally, a lot of people have seen the form that I did where my introduction was actually to a video that Century put together that was dedicated to Kevin. And, I caught some criticism for maybe that was premeditated or trying to just win or something like that. But what people don't know is that literally 20 minutes before I went down to compete for the night show, I was using different music. Something in my gut told me, do this. And I literally went on iMovie on my phone and just threw a photo in there so I could put some audio on it, and gave it to Joe Greenall, who was DJing, and said, here, play this, when I walked up on stage. And then lo and behold, that would be the last time that Kevin ever saw me compete. And then after, that was one of those blackout moments, was running that form. And then after Kevin passed, back in January of 2020, the first tournament I competed in after that was Competes, because COVID hadn't taken over and everything. And then this time I did something that only Steve Babcock and I knew about, which was one of Kevin's most iconic forms, was when he would do the Smooth Criminal routine. He did that for a lot of demonstrations and stuff like that. And so I did my bow form to Smooth Criminal. And the only two people that knew what I was doing was me and Steve Babcock. And so that was, again, it was another one of those weird, like, blackout moments where, weirdly, that time, like, the only other person in the room with me was Steve, because we kind of had that, that moment of knowing what was happening when I was was doing that form. But just talking about that blackout is so interesting and so accurate and so well put by you. And then, terrible transition here. But speaking of a blackout, then in 2011, you put on a blindfold, right? So tell us about that. Was that something you want to do for a long time? You knew when you retired you were going to blindfold yourself? Was that like, spur of the moment, like around US Open that year you decided to do it? Tell us that story, deciding to do the blindfolded routine and then doing it.
Well, just to backtrack, Jackson, I don't think it's weird at all. And people can think what they want to think, but I mean, when you pay homage to someone or you give someone a gift, you people do it in a way that painters and artists give people paintings and artistic works to show appreciation or remembrance of people or whatever. And so that's when we did our forms for people or in front of people for them or whatever. That was the only way we kind of knew how to, or I think best express our emotions sometimes. And so I don't think there's anything, odd about that at all. I mean, and also being on the same team as Kevin Thompson, I mean, for crying out loud, I mean, you're like, seriously? Like, do I even deserve to be on the same team as this guy? But anyway, so I totally get it. But, the blindfold, yeah, I mean, it was, it kind of like the double sword and starting that in 2007, it was, it was a process to try to, try to get that right, knowing that would be my last tournament, and last tournament is, last tournament. I did some other things afterwards that weren't, necessarily competition, related and that, but, at that point it was like, well, it's do or die. I'm not going to have another competition after this that I'm doing. So, I need to do something better. But I want to do something different. I didn't want to do just another harder release that no one had seen, because maybe they wouldn't remember that. I don't think people would have remembered an extra new release I would have done in my form that year compared to the other forms I've done or did throughout the year. So I wanted to do something, again, that would be remembered. And I remember going back to 1999, a thought that had been in my head for so long was, when John Valera did his last form, people can say, oh, this stuff is so, so goofy or whatever. But I mean, something, when you pour your heart into something I competed for, 20 years, things matter. That performance that he did, mattered. It's like, good gracious, like, those tournaments or everything for us were like the Super Bowl, and like when you see Super Bowls of, Tom Brady winning these championships or other guys winning these championships and then retiring or whatever, I mean, it's like, yeah, you want to go out on top. So seeing John Valera do that form and with that aura that he had, because when you watch John, it's like, people paid attention to his form. They didn't just watch and clap and, do the the thing you mentioned, but they paid attention or whatever and were completely drawn into it. It's like, I want my forms, I probably can't do it as well or like that, but I want my forms to feel like that for people watching. And then he retired, and in my mind, it's like, when I retire, I need to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to do something that's going to be remembered. Blindfold had been done with different weapons, open hand forms, weapon forms, sword forms, or whatever. It wasn't something new, but I feel like I could make it new, being my last form and doing it with, the weapons I was doing. So I just went with it. It's like, okay, I need to. Another thing I need to dumb the form down, because I certainly can't do what I was doing in other forms that I was doing with double sword blindfold. So I need to dumb the form down. So that might, be a mistake, because it might be looked at as, well, you just did an easier form or whatever. But then again, I was like, I was at peace with doing it, because I was like, okay, you're doing a blindfold, it's going to be okay if your form's not, as hard as the other forms you've done or whatever. So just kind of piecing all that together or whatever. And really it was like, well, don't screw it up because it's your last, it's your last tournament. But yeah.
One of the things that's real for me. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. No,
I was saying it's funny because I almost didn't make it. Well, no, I can't remember if they were really cracking down on, or not cracking down, I should say. The rules were, I think at the time too, is like if you won traditional, you had to do traditional essence forms in the grands or whatever, and couldn't, because before in the older days, but I guess the older days, you could win on your CMX form or whatever, right? As long as you got in the runoffs, then you can do whatever you wanted to do. But then it got to be where if you won in that form, you had to do that essence of a form all throughout the grands and all that stuff. So I think that was in play that year. So I didn't win creative weapons. I messed up. So I was like, oh my gosh, I had one opportunity left to try to even get to stage. I might not even be able to do this. So I was able to win that division and get to stage and do it. At that point, I was like, well, thank God I made it. I'm good now. Like, the rest is, I'm just happy I just made it up and having the opportunity to do this. And I remember I had to go first in that division, and anybody who's knows competition knows that going first is difficult. You're in the transition from one division to another up on stage. People are talking, whatever, it's hard to really get, the mood right. So I think that was even more the reason where I was thankful, like, oh, thank goodness I'm doing something different, to try to grab the attention, because I was going up first against, Matt Emick and Jarrett Liker and, I think Ross in the division or that in that particular one, but anyway, so, so there was a lot of guys that were like, well, I have to do this now. I don't think I can win if I don't, So anyway, it was a good night. I did the form, and then at that point, after I did the form, I was like, I don't even care what happens. Matt goes out, does an insane form. I was like, well, shoot. I mean, I'm cool if I lose to that, because I did a good form. That was a freaking amazing form. I'm fine. I did my form, winning is winning. Yes. Accolades are accolades. Yes. But I did my form that I had prepared to do, right? Isn't that the goal? Like, you prepare so long to do something, and I did my form, and I hit, some of the forms I'm most happy with, I didn't win. I mean, there were several times in runoffs or whatever, I go out and I do a great form, and, Matt would beat me or whatever. I'd be happy with those forms. Be like, man, I crushed it. I felt really good doing that. That sometimes would matter more, because it's like, okay, I delivered on what I was training on. So just the fact that I was able to deliver at that moment, I was happy with whatever the outcome might be as the other 5 or 6 competitors were going. So
that's a really cool perspective, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, you put together a form that you wanted to be proud of to retire on, and then you executed it. What more could you want? And that brings me to one of the really most emotional parts of the form was the end, where normally at the end of a Kalman Csoka sword form, you get the pose, the swords down, and then the muscle pose. But at the end of this one, we got the swords down, and then you just kind of rocked back and just took it in for a moment. And then even standing up, you didn't really key eye or anything. You just kind of stood up, held the blindfold up. And then you have this moment of reflection of you just kind of looking at the mat as you put the blindfold away. Take us through what's in your mind at that time. What are you feeling the second those swords hit the mat?
Oh man, it was, there was a lot. I mean, 20 years of stuff, because when I say something, I'm going to do it. So when I say I'm going to retire, this is it. I'm going to do it. It might be difficult to try to keep doing that throughout, to keep staying retired. But I'm going to do it. There were other things I needed to accomplish in life for my family. And, there was so many things of 20 years of competing and all the things that I had done and experienced and went through, all the people I would compete for myself too, all the times with the kids and traveling and coaching them, and all the other people I had gotten the opportunity to coach and train for these tournaments that we all loved a lot. So it was like, this is, I'm at peace with, kind of moving on. So that was all kind of going through, through my mind that moment. So.
And so my last question, and the thing that is the most intangible about your career, because there's so much that is tangible. There's the forms that you ran, there's the accolades that you won, the records that you set, double sword being popularized in general. But the one thing that I think sticks most in my mind is actually something that you mentioned about John Valera, and that I always saw it in you, was when you walked on stage, it was different than when anybody else walked on stage. When you walked on stage, a lot of times, they say somebody's name and everybody claps, right? But with you, everybody would just shut up because everybody knew it was Kalman's time to do his thing, right? And so was that something that was intentional? Was that part of the way that you wanted it to be, that you would command a room that way, that you would command attention that way? Did that happen organically? Do you even know what I'm talking about? You know what I mean? Like, talk about how you developed that aura, as I'll describe it, around you, that when you walked on a stage, everything else stood still.
Well, yeah, and I think it stems from something we're all trained to do, I think, when we're young competitors, and it's like when it's your time in the ring, it's your time, demand attention or whatever. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about what I tell, competitors nowadays that I have the opportunity to coach, is if you're not convinced, then no one else that's going to be watching is convinced. And that, sometimes it's hard to get in the mode. And if I'm being 100% honest, maybe I'll raise some eyebrows on this, but I'm not seeing any of that nowadays. I see it from a few of you guys, or whatever, but I'm not seeing any of that nowadays where, when I was competing, we weren't doing nearly as hard of stuff as what's being done now in the forms. I think the athletes in sport karate are some of the best athletes in the world to do what they do, to do what y'all do in a minute and a half time frame. Sometimes with 10 minutes notice, oh, hey, we're doing a division now. What? So some of the best athletes in the world, I think, throughout the years doing this, just being able to dial up form after form after form on the weekends or whatever. But I'm not seeing nowadays that factor that I think everybody nowadays wants to do more instead of people just want to do something different. You know what I mean? Mark Canizzato is known for his it looked like he just glided in his form. Whatever he did, it was, 100 feet in the air, and it was effortless, and it was very poetic. Obviously Matt Emmett was all the tricks, nunchucks, open hand forms, and just his attitude and his grit that he had behind it. Rudy, Lauren and Casey, with everybody had their own thing, and that made them iconic. And so I had to create my own thing. And I think I did that with the sword stuff. But also, putting myself into that moment where, to me, it felt real. It's hard to do a form out there in a ring fighting imaginary people, right? So how can you make it fun? How can you make it interesting for the people watching? And I wanted to make it interesting for maybe someone who was watching who had never been to a karate tournament, don't know anything about it, right? How can you make it enjoyable to watch just in general, right? And not just have to be doing sport karate to understand what in the world's going on, So, I think if some people can get back to that nowadays, I think it would, help to, all the competitors nowadays like yourself who have created, your own iconic style and everything and what people remember, how can other people do that or whatever? Because like I said, I don't think we did stuff, maybe not, I don't know, did stuff nearly as hard back in the day as what's being done now, but it's the way we did it that made us look different. And we developed our own lane and, just ran with it. And so that was kind of my thing, was like, I want to draw into this, moment as much as I could. And some of it was just, not intentional either. Like I said, a lot of that stuff or whatever was not premeditated. It would just kind of happen. Like emotion would come out at the end of the form. Like, yes, I did a good form. This right now, cool. Okay. All right. Not frowned upon too much. I guess I'll keep doing that. But, that type of stuff, you were just so in the moment or whatever that you had that, it was like almost the Matrix. You kind of saw things in code as you were doing your form or whatever. I mean, that's just kind of how into it I was. And, if it drew other people in to it as much as it drew me into it, then awesome. I guess kind of, that's what I originally wanted to do, is just be remembered for, for some stuff. So.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great take home message, because it's something that I preach all the time and I use you as an example, because if we look at the almost decade since you've retired, right, there have been a bunch of people since you retired that, because of Kalman, did double sword, thinking that double sword would be what would help them win because it helped Kalman win. Right. But if we look at that 10 years, we haven't seen anybody close to Kalman in terms of double sword. And so when I was looking up to you with Bo, I never said to myself, oh, well, I need to do double sword if I want to be like Kalman, or I need to use two bows if I want to be like Kalman. No. What Kalman did was something different than what anybody else ever did. So what I need to do is find what makes me different. And what's interesting is, I had people even tell me that I shouldn't do it. When I came out with the first draft of the bow form that I did, that first won me an overall, that had the bow tricks comboed together, and I think it was 9 releases in that form that had really not been done before. I was told not to do it. I was told that it wouldn't win. I was told that I wouldn't have a chance if I did that. And it was in my heart. And I said, I'm going to try it and we're going to see what happens. And if it does well, then it does well, but it's what I want to do. Right. And so I think that that's the most important message that any young competitors watching that I want you to get from this is you've got 2 guys that have been on stage and won before telling you, if you want to be great at this, don't try to be like Kalman. Don't try to be like me. Don't try to be like anybody. Become your own competitor, create your own legacy. And ultimately, that's what's going to make you successful. Any final thoughts off of that, Kalman?
No, I mean, you're right. We, competitors have to do, first of all, what they want to do. Because if you're not doing what you want to do, then you're not going to, again, be convinced, and no one else is going to be convinced. So it kind of starts like that. If you want to do bow, you do bow. If you want to do double bow, do double bow. If you want to do sword, but be bought into it. Because if you're kind of halfway not, then it's going to show. It might not show, but you'll be holding yourself back. So first of all, be bought into, what you're doing. And then if you want to look like, Jackson Rudolph or Matt Emmett or John Valera, those guys, then figure out how you can do that in your way with your style and the weapon or the open hand form or whatever that you're doing. I think that all too often, maybe young competitors, and it's not a bad thing at all. It's just there's a better way of thinking. Want to be like, certain people that they've looked up to or whatever, but we're not. We're all different, right? We all have different, ways that we move, different ways that we look or whatever. So you have to, one, be like that person, but in your own skin, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, I try to use anything for a learning experience. I think if anybody has the patience to listen to me ramble on for, the past hour and 15 minutes, can hopefully take some, some stuff that we talked about and, take it for what it's worth and maybe use it or whatever. Because been able to see a lot, been able to experience a lot, like I said earlier, it took me a while to get everything, I think, figured out. But again, if you're going to be successful at anything in life, you have to be bought in. You have to be 100%. And you have to do those things within what you're doing with a purpose. If you're training on a day, train with a purpose. Don't just dabble on something for 3 hours at the karate school or whatever just because you're there. But instead, train until you're, almost, throwing up on the side for an hour or whatever. Things like that. And then enjoy things I'm really trying to tell nowadays or whatever is enjoy the process or whatever. Because if you just train to compete, you might do okay, but you're going to get burnt out. People ask, how do you compete for 20 years and not get burnt out? Well, it's like, I always found a way to, and I think I mentioned it with kind of the different phases of my, competing years or whatever, kind of found a way to make it a new chapter or whatever. It's funny because I watched that documentary, The Last Dance or whatever, with Michael Jordan and the Bulls or whatever. And there's a lot of, now I'm nowhere near that level as far as, an athlete goes, but there was a lot of similarities though that I really enjoyed watching. And I was like, man, that's some of us talking, using certain things to fuel them, like doing push-ups, I guess, in the hotel room the previous night or whatever, because I think a funny meme is, and I took that personally or whatever, but, just using that stuff and making it, light a fire under you to, bring out that competitive desire that we have or whatever, but enjoying the process through all of it, enjoying training more than actually competing or whatever and all that. So you don't get burnt out. So then you're just doing it to be a healthy individual in life. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's my 2 cents behind it.
For sure. Well, I think that's more than 2 cents, and I think that's exactly what everybody wanted. And I think that's an excellent perspective. And I think that anybody, especially competitors, leaving this podcast should absolutely be motivated by that message. It's what drives a true competitor, right? It's not just the desire to win, but the desire to do what you love and to enjoy it and to always excel at it and to continue getting better at it and to improve from failures and all of those things that you just discussed. I think all culminates in what makes a successful competitor and then ultimately what makes a successful person in life. And you're somebody that has embodied that through and through from your martial arts career and beyond. And so I can't thank you enough for your time tonight. Any final thoughts, comments that you want to share before we wrap this up?
No, man, I'm just hoping you all can get out there and start competing again here soon. Not, in person with fans and whatnot. So, looking forward to seeing what you're going to do. And you mentioned you were, about to be going to medical school. So I wish you all the success with your future endeavors there, and congratulations on your engagement and everything. So just kind of the next chapter in your life. And, anybody out there that, wants to have a good year competing or whatever, don't let, again, enjoy the process. Don't let a year or last year, with all this COVID craziness and everything, deter you from doing what you love to do. You can still make it enjoyable and still feel like that's your purpose at this chapter in your life, to continue doing that. People are doing that with, some virtual, competitions and all this stuff, trying to stay in it, but just do things for others, do things for yourself, because what I realize is you never know when you might make a difference in someone's life or someone's watching you or whatever. So there's always a greater reason behind what we're doing. So, like I said, look forward to having everybody back out there and seeing everybody. I watch. I know I don't chime up a whole lot anymore with everything going on, but I watch and am still a fan of all the stuff sport karate related, all the crazy things Trickers are doing, all the things you guys are doing in the sport karate tournament. So hopefully I'll be able to see that again here soon with everybody. So Jackson, I appreciate you having me on, man. Again, thanks to you and everybody to listen to me, ramble on about my, 20 years as a competitive martial artist, but I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you and thank you so much for the kind words. And I couldn't agree more that I want us to be back out there sooner or later so that I can have that last stretch of my career that I'd like to enjoy as well. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. To everybody watching, I'm not joking when I say this has been incredible. That's not just because it's my show. We've gotten some great stuff here. So be sure, if you've got somebody that you want to motivate, you've got somebody that loves sport karate, make sure that you share this video with them, send them the link, share it on your Facebook page. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much for tuning in. And one last thank you to Black Belt Magazine for making all this possible and sponsoring the Jackson Rudolph podcast. So that's it for episode 50. I'm Jackson Rudolph. That's Kalman Csoka, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, guys.